Good evening, I'm David Kramer with Alaska Weather. As always, please visit our website, weather.gov/Alaska. You can get any updates to our forecast or check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we might have out for your area. Also call our weather info line at 1-800-472-0391. Get any updates to the forecast through that means as well. And you can email me at the address at the bottom of the screen, david.kramer@noaa.gov. Taking a look now, we have one advisory that's out for the state. This is in the Copper River Basin for the Kennecott River, specifically out in McCarthy. And this is going to be out until Tuesday. And this is due to a glacier dam lake release for the Hidden Lake area, and that's at where the Kennecott Glacier is as well. And that feeds into the Kennecott River, which is why we expect that those water levels to rise. Now, if you look at our hydrograph on the image here, you can see on the very right side of this with those blue dots starting to rise now as that Glacier Dam Lake starts to release, and we do expect that to go up another 3 to 5 feet over the next 12 to 24 hours, which is why we have that out until Tuesday. Again, that's for the Kennecott River at McCarthy, where we do have a flood advisory in effect. Also want to highlight some of the rain in southeast Alaska. We do look out over the next 3 days out for southeast, expecting more rain to continue. However, there is going to be a chance for a break tonight into Monday morning from some of those showers, but then as we pick up through Tuesday, we do expect it to be primarily rain for all of southeast. Take a look now at our fire danger. Most of the activity is going to be up further to the north in the Yukon Flats area. We do have an area of higher danger, and out by Bettles as well. And then the very western portions of the Brooks Range, we do have some high danger out there. So bear in mind, even with some of the rain showers we've been having, there is still threat for some fire danger, especially as we get into the more northern locations of the interior and out in the northwestern parts of the coastline. Taking a look now at our satellite imagery, we'll start off with the low that's south of the Alaska Peninsula area, moving steadily to the east, bringing cloud cover with it and some more rain behind it. That's going to be the system that eventually makes its way to the Panhandle area on Monday, bringing rain back to the area. As we watch this loop again, we can look out over the Bering Sea and we can see some of the darker colors out there representing some of the lower stratus that we have underneath high pressure that is dominating out over the Bering Sea, bringing stratus and fog to the area. As we look up along the Arctic coastline, we can see a low pressure system dropping in from the north, bringing cloud cover out through much of the northern locations of the interior and along the Arctic coastline. And then finally, we can watch another system approaching the western Aleutian Islands, not quite making it there on this satellite imagery run, but bringing more precipitation to the area eventually. As we look out for the remainder of weather for today, we'll start off with our high pressure out over the Bering Sea. With that dominant high in place, we do have areas of fog throughout the Bering that's extending down into the Aleutian Islands. And with low pressure to the south of the islands, we are expecting a mix of rain and fog throughout most of the Aleutians. As we get up into the mainland part of the state, we'll have some showers in southwest Alaska, extending up through much of south central as well. And then as we get into the interior, from southwest interior through the central and eastern locations, we are expecting continued afternoon and evening thunderstorm activity. That's going to extend up into the central and eastern portions of the Brooks Range as well. However, as we make it out to the west coast of the state from the YK Delta area further to the north, we are expecting fog to linger. Then we'll have some fog along the Arctic coastline as well, and much of that will mix with rain. Down in the Panhandle area, we have shower activity expected to continue for the afternoon and evening, but then be diminishing overnight. And as we move into those nighttime hours, we'll still have some of those showers lingering, but you can notice the low that's moving through the Gulf of Alaska, starting to bring some southerly air, and that next round of rain, not quite going to make it there through much of the nighttime hours. Just going to have those showers continuing to diminish tonight over the Panhandle. As we move up into south central Alaska, the main location for the rain is going to be along the North Gulf Coast and then down into Kodiak Island as well. Have some areas of fog by Cook Inlet. Then as we get up into the higher elevations of the Alaska Range and Talkeetna Mountains, expecting more rain up there. And we'll have some rain throughout southwest Alaska, extending up through the western and central interior with some lighter showers in the eastern portions of the interior. And then some rain in the Brooks Range as well. All along the Arctic coastline and down much of the west coast of the state, we are expecting to see some fog, and that's going to continue down to the YK Delta area. And then with high pressure continuing to dominate the Bering Sea, we expect more fog and rain for the Bering and the Aleutian Islands. As we move into Monday, high pressure is still going to remain in place, primarily with a lot of stratus out over the Bering, but we're expecting a lot of the fog to be up by the YK Delta area, St. Lawrence Island, and on much of the west coast into the Arctic coastline. As we drop back down into the Aleutians, we will see some rain out by the eastern Aleutian Islands from low pressure out over the northern Pacific just to the south of the islands. And then another weaker area of high pressure in the Bristol Bay area. We're going to see some shower activity around Bristol Bay. That's going to become more thunderstorm activity in the afternoon and evening hours on Monday as we move up into southwest portions of the interior. And we're going to continue to see the potential for thunderstorms in the afternoon and evening hours for the central, eastern, and northeastern portions of the interior. As we get into the remainder of the Brooks Range, especially out west, we're expecting that to be primarily showers. And then we're going to have some more rain down in south central Alaska, with the heaviest being along the North Gulf Coast. We're going to have continued rain and shower activity down through the Panhandle areas. We have that southerly flow with the low approaching from the western part of the Bering Sea as it continues its eastward progression. As we move into Tuesday, we can see that low getting closer to the Panhandle area, where we're going to see continued rain with that onshore flow right off of the Gulf of Alaska. As we move to south central Alaska, as that Gulf flow pushes off further to the east, expecting less rain for the south central area. However, we will have some thunderstorms in the Alaska Range and much of the central and eastern portions of the interior. Again, this is going to be primarily in the afternoon and evening hours on Tuesday. So look up along the Arctic coastline, expecting to see more fog up there with high pressure out over the Arctic, and then some rain down much of the northwestern portions of the coastline. Then down by the Bristol Bay and YK Delta areas, high pressure is finally pushing off to the east from dominating out over much of the central portions of the Bering Sea, which is allowing another low pressure system to move in from the North Pacific toward the western and central Aleutian Islands, bringing rain back to the area. So look at our temperatures, lows for Monday morning, dropping down into the lower to mid 40s for much of the Aleutian Islands, a little bit warmer as we move to the east, upper 40s for the Alaska Peninsula and the YK Delta, or the Bristol Bay area, YK Delta area, dropping down into the lower 50s. And those lower 50s are going to extend up through the western and central portions of the interior and get a little bit colder as we get to the far eastern locations of the interior. By the Seward Peninsula area on the northern side, going to drop down into the mid 30s. However, Kotzebue going to stay a little bit warmer, dropping down to around 49 degrees. Then along the Arctic coastline, dropping down into the 30s, with UAFTV getting right down to freezing tonight. As we move down to south central Alaska, temperatures dropping into the mid to upper 40s for most locations, a little bit warmer by the water areas where we have Cordova getting down to 52 degrees. Then for the Panhandle area, dropping down to right around 50 degrees for all locations Monday morning. So move into Monday afternoon, the Panhandle getting up into the upper 50s, a little bit cooler there at Yakutat getting to 56 degrees. Getting into the 60s for most locations around south central Alaska. However, staying a little bit cooler for areas around the Gulf. Kodiak getting up to 58 degrees. As we move into the interior, get up into the mid 60s for the most part. Galena going to be one of the warmest in the state at 70 degrees expected high for Monday afternoon. And we're going to see continuation of those mid to upper 60s pushing down into southwest Alaska, down into the Bristol Bay area and locations around the YK Delta. However, as we get closer towards the Bering, temperatures are going to be a little bit more tempered and getting up to 54 degrees for Makoriak. Up along the Arctic coastline, getting into the 40s for most locations. Nukiavik staying a little bit colder there again, getting up to 38 degrees. Then down in the Alaska Peninsula, getting up into the mid to upper 60s, or mid to upper 50s rather, and in the lower 50s for much of the Aleutian Islands, with St. Paul getting up to 54 degrees. Tuesday morning temperatures dropping back down into the mid 40s for the Aleutian Islands, right around 50 degrees for the Alaska Peninsula, and mid to upper 40s for the Bristol Bay area. Mid to upper 40s also extending out over the YK Delta area and then getting into the lower 50s as we move up into the western portions of the interior and staying right around 50 degrees all throughout the central and eastern locations of the interior. A little bit colder out by the Kotzebue Sound area, dropping down into the upper 30s to the lower 40s, and then dropping down into the mid 30s, much of the Arctic coastline, a little bit warmer for those western locations. Down in south central Alaska, temperatures dropping down into the mid 40s, and then down in the Panhandle area, dropping down into right around 50 degrees to those lower 50s. As we look out into Tuesday afternoon, staying down in the Panhandle area, temperatures getting up into the mid to upper 50s, warmest as we get closer to the Gulf waters. As we move over to south central Alaska, temperatures getting up into the upper 60s by the Gulf, and then getting into the 70s as we get to the more interior locations, Talkeetna getting up to 72 degrees. So getting to the interior, warm day Tuesday afternoon, getting up around 70 degrees with Fort Yukon getting up to 74, and then into the 60s as we drop down into southwestern portions of the state. Up along the west coast by the Seward Peninsula area, right around 50 degrees, and in the 50s for the Arctic coastline and 50s for the Aleutian Islands.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
For aviation, we'll start off with a look at our flying weather on Monday morning. Out for the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, we are expecting widespread IFR conditions for the area that's going to extend into the Alaska Peninsula and areas of Kodiak Island. Up along the west coast, some areas of MVFR and IFR conditions will be right along the coastlines, and that'll be true along the Arctic coast as well. Through much of the interior, you're expecting VFR conditions with the exception of the central Brooks Range where we are expecting some IFR conditions to develop, and then down in the Alaska Range some IFR conditions as well. Down through south central Alaska, primarily MVFR conditions with some areas of IFR as we get closer towards the Gulf. And then down in the Panhandle, widespread IFR conditions are expected. As we move into Monday afternoon, a lot of the Panhandle is going to clear up to MVFR conditions. However, some areas will still have some lingering IFR. South Central Alaska will start to shift to being primarily VFR with some isolated areas of MVFR, especially closer towards the Gulf. Then in the interior portions of the state, primarily VFR conditions, isolated areas of MVFR are expected. And then along the Arctic coastline, going to see some MVFR conditions right along the coast. That's going to extend down much of the west coast as well, out through the Bristol Bay area. And then in the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, expecting widespread IFR conditions. Moving into Tuesday morning, continuing to see those IFR conditions out for the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands. And then out over mainland Alaska, pretty similar to Monday afternoon, where we'll see primarily VFR conditions for the state with some areas of MVFR along the west coast, along the Arctic coast, some areas of the Brooks Range, and some isolated areas in the higher terrain down in south central Alaska. Down in the Panhandle, a mixture of MVFR and IFR conditions are expected, primarily IFR in more southern locations and getting more MVFR as we get further to the north. Then in Tuesday afternoon, going to see a similar pattern down in the Panhandle area where we're going to see primarily MVFR conditions in the northern locations and shifting to IFR conditions for the more southern locations. Throughout south central Alaska and much of the rest of mainland Alaska, expecting to see VFR conditions till we get along the coastlines where the Arctic coastline and the west coast are going to see some MVFR conditions. And as we move out over the Bering Sea and Aleutians, we're going to see that those IFR conditions continuing throughout the afternoon on Tuesday. For the passes starting up north at AKwx, we're going to start off IFR and improve all the way to VFR in the afternoon. Adigan's going to stay a little bit worse, where we're going to start off IFR and improve to marginal conditions in the afternoon. Dropping down to the Alaska Range, starting off with Merrill, we're going to start off MVFR, improve to VFR conditions later in the day. Lake Clark will start off IFR and then improve to VFR conditions in the afternoon. Rainy Pass will start off IFR, improve to marginal conditions later in the day, and Windy Pass will start off IFR, improve all the way to VFR in the afternoon. For Isabel Pass, we expect to be marginal throughout the day on Monday. Metasta Pass should be VFR throughout the day on Monday. Tenedo will start off marginal and then improve to VFR conditions. Portage will start off IFR and then improve to marginal conditions in the afternoon. And then Chilkoot and White will both remain IFR throughout the day on Monday. Taking a look at our freezing levels, we have a pocket of colder air up along the Arctic coastline. Freezing levels down to the surface just off the coast, and then 2,000 to 6,000 feet as we move further south into the Brooks Range. Area of higher heights out over the western part of the Aleutian Islands. Going to see freezing levels at around 12,000 feet. And then some area of warmer air coming into the southern portions of the Gulf as well, getting up to 10 to 12,000 feet, and then a little bit south of the area up to as high as 14,000 feet. For our icing, main area is going to be in the northern portions of the interior, extending through the Brooks Range and Arctic coastline. We're expecting above 8,000 feet there. And then in northern portions of the Gulf, getting up into the Montague Island area, above 8,000 feet is expected. For our jet, we'll start off over mainland Alaska, where we have a branch of the jet at northwesterly winds 55 knots coming in through the Kotzebue Sound area, dipping down over the Alaska Peninsula around 70 knots out of a northerly direction, and then coming out with a westerly direction out over the Panhandle area up to as high as 75 knots. Taking a look at 9,000 feet, out of our high pressure in the northern part of the Bering Sea, westerly winds 35 knots there, pretty weak for the rest of the Aleutians and much of mainland Alaska. Till we get to the northern portions of the interior, westerly winds 20 knots is expected. Panhandle is going to be pretty light winds, and then we're going to have a weaker barrier jet up along the North Gulf coastline out of the easterly direction, 30 knots there. Drop it down to 3,000 feet, pretty similar. Out over the Gulf, we're going to see 35 knots out of a southeasterly direction in the northern Gulf. Out over the interior portions of the state, westerly winds 20 knots. Then out over the Aleutian Islands, easterly winds are expected around 20 knots. On the northern side of high pressure over the western Bering, we are going to see westerly flow 25 knots. So look at our turbulence, not much to speak of except for the area around the barrier jet as we get closer towards the Cordova area, where we will see turbulence below 4,000 feet.
On March 11, 2011, a powerful tsunami hit Japan, destroying cities and villages. As the water receded back into the ocean, it pulled what remained of buildings, cars, boats, and homes along with it. Scrap metals, plastics, and objects of all shapes and sizes either sank near the shore or floated away. In the days that followed, large masses of floating debris could easily be seen by satellite imagery and aerial photos. In the wake of this disaster, NOAA is assessing the potential impact that the debris may have on U.S. shores. So, where will this debris go, and when will it get there? To help answer those questions, scientists are using computer models to estimate the debris' path, using its starting location in the tsunami zone and historical weather and ocean conditions. The findings are that some debris could pass near or wash ashore in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands as early as this winter. Debris may also approach the west coast of the United States in 2013 and potentially circle back to the main Hawaiian Islands in 2014. But scientists caution that there are limitations to what computer models can tell us, now that the debris has moved out of satellite view, and with currents and winds in the Pacific constantly changing, there is no guarantee that the debris will stay on the predicted path. Items will sink along the way, or break up and disperse in many directions. Despite these unknowns, NOAA and its partners are collecting data, assessing possible impacts, and making preparations in case debris does wash ashore. The 2011 tsunami in Japan reminds us that the devastation that happens on land can also become a marine debris issue at sea.
Imagine all of this underwater. In a major tsunami, it could happen. In this part of Washington state, it's happened before, hundreds of years ago. Sometime in the future, it will likely happen again. But we can be ready. If a tsunami strikes, this school will provide a place for people to ride it out above the waves.
We're in Westport, Washington, and right behind me is the very first tsunami vertical evacuation center in the United States.
This is an emergency. Please walk to the nearest exit. Go to the stairs tower and proceed up the stairs.
Tsunamis are a potential hazard for low-lying coastal areas. That's why many coastal communities have plans in place to get people to safety, high ground or inland, where they can be beyond the reach of a tsunami. Often there are signs showing where to go and where to gather. Most tsunamis are caused by underwater earthquakes along subduction zones, where two of Earth's plates collide and one is forced under the other. Westport and other Pacific Northwest coastal communities are especially at risk because one of these zones lies just offshore. It's called the Cascadia Subduction Zone. An earthquake here caused a tsunami in 1700 that flooded shores as far away as Japan. Experts say it's just a matter of time before it happens again. Since the subduction zone is so close, a tsunami like the one in 1700 could strike before people in some low-lying areas could get to high ground or inland. And Westport doesn't have a lot of high ground or easy routes inland.
If we get an earthquake or a tsunami, we're going to get a lot of water in the area really quickly, and we needed a place to go. So our community built this brand new school, and above our gym and cafeteria, we have a roof. And so the idea is that we'll get all of our students up, and anybody from the community who needs to get up, they can get up there as well.
Ocosta Elementary School might seem like a normal school, but look more closely. It's engineered to withstand monster waves. Tsunami vertical evacuation shelters must be able to resist the powerful forces that a tsunami brings. Hydrodynamic, buoyant, hydrostatic, and debris impact forces and strong currents. They're also designed to help people get to safety quickly.
There are 4 big staircases on each corner of the building, and each one of those staircases is 8 feet wide, and we can get the whole school evacuated in about 4.5 minutes.
Everybody should be at a 0.
On the roof of the building, there is water and food and buckets and shelters and tarps and blankets and different things so that we can be up there for 2, 3, maybe 4 days while we wait for rescue.
You can go to the top and you know you'll be safe. It feels really nice to have a special building because you feel protected.
This community decided that a tsunami evacuation center was important because they didn't have anywhere to go, and they decided to use their money to build the building. The additional cost is anywhere between 10 and 20% of the actual building cost itself, and that's really a sound investment for a lot of protection. You may be there a while, but you're safe and you're secure, and that's the most important thing.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back for the marine section. We'll start off with a look at our ice edge. Ice along the west coast of the state has all melted away, but we still have some ice along the Arctic, especially between areas of Utqiagvik and Prudhoe Bay, where the heaviest ice still remains. As we look at the rest of our marine forecast, starting off in the southeast in the inside waters, southerly winds 5 to 10 knots are expected. A little bit stronger out over the Gulf southeasterly winds 25 to 30 knots, becoming more easterly as we get into the northern Gulf waters. Then on Tuesday, flowing the northern part of the Gulf, easterly winds 25 knots, but as we get to those southeastern locations, with our low pressure moving in closer, we'll see southwesterly winds around 20 knots with seas as high as 9 feet in the Gulf. In the inside waters, southerly winds 10 to 15 knots, stronger in the southern inside waters as we get southeasterly winds up to as high as 25 knots with seas up to 5 feet. On Monday, out over the south central area, staying out in the Gulf, east to northeast winds 35 to 40 knots, a little bit weaker as we get further off to the east, around 30 knots there. And then in Prince William Sound area, northeasterly winds 15 knots expected. And then through Cook Inlet down into Kamishak Bay area, we have northeasterly winds 10 to 15 knots. On Tuesday, winds in Cook Inlet southwesterly 10 knots. As we get to the west of the Barren Islands, picking up out of the westerly direction 15 knots. And on the east of the Barren Islands, westerly winds 25 knots. Then as we move up into further north portions of the Gulf, with westerly winds 22-30 knots. In the far eastern locations, northeasterly winds 25 knots. And then in Prince William Sound, westerly winds 10 knots expected. For the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island area, starting around Kodiak Island, north to northeast winds 20 to 30 knots, with the strongest winds on the south of the island, and the seas are going to get as high as 8 feet, strongest again on the southern portions of the island. Then on the Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula, east to northeast winds 15 to 20 knots, and on the Bering side, easterly winds 10 to 15 knots. On Tuesday, flow around Kodiak Island becoming west to southwest 15 to 25 knots, still strongest on the south side of the island. As we move to the Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula, easterly winds 15 to 20 knots, seas as high as 7 feet there. And then on the Bering side, weaker winds, northwest 10 knots in Bristol Bay, and easterly flow 15 knots as we get to closer towards Cold Bay. On Monday for the Aleutian Islands, starting off for the central and eastern Aleutians, northeasterly winds 15 to 20 knots expected, seas up to as high as 6 feet, highest on the Pacific side. As we move out by the western Aleutians, easterly winds 15 knots are expected. On Tuesday, easterly flow by the western Aleutians 25 knots, dropping down as we get further to the east for the central and eastern Aleutian Islands, easterly winds 10 to 15 knots. Along the west coast of the state, pretty weak on Monday, around 10 knots out of a primarily south to west direction, till we get into the Norton Sound area where we'll see westerly winds around 15 knots. Then on Tuesday, south to southwest flow all along the west coast, 10 knots along much of the coastline, a little bit stronger by St. Lawrence Island, 20 knots there, and by St. Matthew Island, 20 knots there as well, with seas as high as 6 feet, highest by St. Matthew Island. As we look up along the Arctic coastline, easterly winds 10 to 15 knots, then becoming more northerly as we drop down the west coast of the state, still around 10 knots, and then through the Bering Strait area, southwesterly winds 10 knots expected. On Tuesday, staying along the west coast, southerly winds 20 knots are expected, becoming more east and dropping down in speed as we move up the Arctic coastline. For western locations, easterly winds 15 knots, dropping down to 10 knots, but still out of the easterly direction as we get closer to the Beaufort Sea. Our forecast for the remainder of the night, starting off over the Bering Sea, we have high pressure dominating the area, resulting in stratus and fog. Some of those areas mixing with rain as well, especially as we get by the Aleutian Islands. Up the west coast from the YK Delta up through the Arctic coastline, we are expecting areas of fog to continue, and then showers throughout much of the interior portions of the state down into southwest and south central Alaska. However, the thunderstorms will diminish through this evening for the interior. We'll also see some fog develop over the Cook Inlet area, and then some light showers remaining for some of the areas around the Panhandle. However, as we move into Monday, a low pressure system out over the Gulf going to bring heavier rain to the Panhandle area and along the North Gulf Coast to much of south central Alaska. Thunderstorms are again expected in the interior to southwestern interior, central and eastern locations that are going to develop primarily in the afternoon and evening hours. Then up along the Arctic coastline, expecting fog that's going to linger down the west coast through the YK Delta area. And we're going to see continued high pressure out over the Bering Sea, resulting in more stratus in the area. A new low pressure system out by the eastern Aleutian is going to bring some rain to the area. And then on Tuesday, we are expecting more afternoon and evening thunderstorms primarily for the central and eastern locations of the interior. However, we will see some shower activity lingering down into southwest Alaska and continued rain out over the Panhandle area from low pressure out over the Gulf. Then a new system coming in from the North Pacific towards the western Aleutian Islands is going to bring some rain back to that area. Alaska Weather, I'm David Kramer.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.